So welcome to the Node.js build working group meeting for July 16th, 2024. We'll follow the agenda as was created in issue 3831 in the repo. Before we get started, any announcements that people would like to share? Okay, if no announcements, the first one is planning requirements for Node 23. I think, Richard, you'd open that one.
Yeah, so we need to have a little think about whether we need to do anything in terms of build requirements for Node 23. So Node 23 is planned for release in October this year. So ideally, we'll have any infrastructure changes in place by September. Um, and mainly this is, I've opened an issue as a sort of, I guess, anchoring sort of main entry point, but the hope is to like link off to other issues to talk about specific topics in more detail. Um, so, for example, I've made a proposal that we move the minimum supported GCC level up to GCC 12. We did see problems with Node 22 on some platforms with GCC 10, and given the way that sort of V8 upstream operate, we are finding it at least the people I talk to that are porting V8 to other platforms are saying that um, it is becoming harder to maintain compatibility with older GCCs because of the way that uh, V8 always target like a tip of the tree CLang environment, which generally means then that you need a sort of similarly reasonably up to date GCC compiler. So yeah, we don't think there's anything fundamentally broken at the moment, but I think for definitely like Node 24, we want to move, and so I'd rather move now for Node 23 so that we can, go sort of current release and see if there are other issues that will be flushed out. Um, for most releases, that shouldn't affect the platforms that you can run Node on because we compile most binaries, the official binaries on Red Hat 8, Enterprise Linux 8. So the only platform that we use GCC for that there's a question mark over that would be the 32-bit ARM binaries, which Red Hat doesn't support. So we're having to compile that separately with a cross compiler. And the last, yeah, I think it was Node 22 or maybe in one of the earlier Node releases, we did find that when we, went to GCC 10 and used the cross compiler, that actually also shifted lib standard C++ requirements. So that's only an issue for 32-bit ARM. I don't know yet what that would shift that to. So that's another bit of investigative work that we'll need to do to answer that question, or whether we come to a decision. I don't know how to come to a decision, as to whether that platform is still something that we want to carry forward. I don't have the data either way to back up. I mean, I'm presuming people are using it because people do ask when things go missing. So um, yeah, anything that you can think of in terms of like if you want to move compilers. So I think Yugi's did open an issue in the core repo about moving the macOS minimum supported version. I think he's now closed that issue because the build infrastructure isn't ready yet. So he wants to go to macOS 13. I think currently the current minimum target is 10.15. And um, I think it's probably not too unreasonable to bump it to something. Whether 13 is, too new, I don't know. But obviously we first need to get something into the so I think we've got macOS 11 in the CI and nothing really later than that. So, we wouldn't really be able to test anything other than 11. So, if we bump the minimum up beyond 11, we wouldn't be able to test macOS at all on the current CI. But yeah, I mean, that's something to worth considering as to, what are we going to move macOS to? Maybe it's, maybe we bump up to 11 or maybe it's 12, whatever we can get into the CI. I guess we'll talk about that a bit later on when we, cover those things. But yeah, I guess yeah, that this issue is on there for awareness. Although obviously, the nearer we get to sort of September, October, the more pressing it will be to close this one out. And yeah, if people have other suggestions or if they have concerns about the things that are being proposed already. So, for example, on Windows, there's a big discussion about CLang and the issues that we're currently having with Visual Studio and how V8 are going to drop support for Visual Studio in like later V8s. So again, that's all, there's an issue linked off from this issue, which discusses that. So yeah, it's all anchored here, but yeah, scroll off to the other chart, the linked issues or create new issues and link them to from this one.
So yeah, it would be good. I don't know, like Ryan and Ulysses, and if you could get together with Ulysses, because I think you've been mostly working on the Mac stuff and come up with a proposal for the map changes. That would be good.
Yeah, I mean, that could. Is there much else on this planning thread? Because that could dovetail nicely into the next issue on the list, basically.
No,
I
unless
don't-
anyone had anything else. I didn't have anything else on the planning thing. So yeah, let's move on to the
Great.
curve.
I've got an update. I've met with Mac Stadium twice now. Once just as sort of a preliminary get together to describe to them our issue and our situation and discuss with them the future of their support and how that they can how we can leverage their machines better and come up with a better system so that we can cover all the testing that we need to cover. And then myself and Ulysses met with them last Friday to kind of discuss more in the technical details about our plan. And their sales engineer, we met with them, and I described the plan that I'd laid out in this issue as far as like transitioning over to using an ephemeral node strategy, using Packer to create our images, and then leveraging the nodes as less of a static resource and more of VM containers that would allow us to spin up and tear down various images. And the sales engineer was like, yes, that's exactly what I would have suggested you do. So that was validating. So I tried to request that they give us resources enough to give us a new cluster and to start fresh. They seemed more inclined to want us to just upgrade our existing cluster in place. So I think that the strategy is then going to be just upgrade the cluster to Orca 3, and then they'll be able to move slightly larger ARM nodes, the Apple Silicon backed nodes into the cluster as well, and then we'll be able to take our other ones offline. The once we have the Packer process up and running, it'll be relatively easy to add new OS versions because it's similar to Ansible, where it's basically and it'll be using Ansible to provision the whole machine, but then it'll create an image. And so once we have the images in the cluster, we'll be able to have the Jenkins plugin stand up and tear down them on demand, which will use a lot less resources. Like we won't have to have a release machine that's dedicated, that's on all the time. It'll be able to still be sequestered and still be only accessible from people's release access, but it'll be able to just not exist until we its release time, and then it'll spin up and exist. And so we should be able to support 12, 13 moving forward once we get that going. I did have some questions about 10.15 support, but now I realize that we probably have to keep 10.15 to be able to test node 18 until it goes fully end of life in 2025.
Yeah.
Because I realized I had misread the node support matrix thing, and I was looking at the latest and not the Node 18 node support matrix, and that was where I was like, oh, there's a different version of this document.
Yeah, I think if we can get 10.15, that'd be great. If we can't, we can make a decision then. We have in the past supported like macOS versions and then not be able to test on them. So I think at one point we had like a minimum 10.13, but we never had anything 10.13 in any sort of CI provider, even like Stadium. So it is an option, but yeah, if we can do it, that'd be great. If not, then we'll just have to swallow a gapping testing.
Yeah.
The really important one is macOS 11 because the release binaries on 18, Node 18 are built on that. So that is a minimum we need. 15 we don't
Mhm.
need for testing.
Right. And once we're using ephemeral nodes, it makes it a lot easier to do something like support 10.15 because we don't need to have a machine dedicated to running a test just in case. It can just,
Yeah.
spin up when we need it. And so that it actually won't be that difficult to the only thing I'm hesitant on is getting the image built, just because once things start to get that old, then all the build tools and everything else start to be like, oh, well, this isn't supported anymore, and that's not
Yeah,
supported anymore.
I think we've already hit that. I think Ulysses already hit that the last time we had to rebuild a 1015 machine, and was that Brew was having to, well, I think he had problems with just Brew. And then
Right.
even then, packages in there had it, they were having to compile them from source rather than getting binaries. So I guess that's going to be like some pain. And then, presume if that's
We just
successful, that'll be a
image the existing machines.
I'm not sure if that'll work for taking the existing uh images. I mean, it's possible. Actually, those are running in Orca now, so that could
Right.
be possible. That's worth looking into for sure.
How
Okay.
does that? How does the imaging deal with like so most of the VMs we've got are sort of they're the same, but they have like a different Jenkins secrets because they are different nodes in Jenkins.
Hmm.
And I think one of the problems we had in the past was that, when we did like an Orca upgrade or the Orca cluster reset, the VMs would all come back up, but they would reset to like the image state, which meant that
Right.
we had 2 or 3 machines that tried to, contact with the same Jenkins secret, which
Right. And
obviously
that
was problematic.
that 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 will be the issue going forward for
Like the
upgrading from 2 to
ephemeral,
3. But
right?
once it's
Okay,
ephemeral, that won't be an issue at all, because
okay.
ephemeral nodes, Jenkins basically is responsible for connecting with Orca,
Right.
demanding a
Yeah,
machine, and then
I see it. Yeah,
does all the negotiation there. So
yeah.
I
Okay.
think also, I mean, that was just because we didn't set up our images ideally, right? Like, I'm pretty sure if we had 3 images, one for each of one of the machines, and we may even have that now. That what I sort of understood from Ulysses is sometimes the ordering would cause a challenge just because of our port forwarding versus anything else.
right, and we
Yeah.
won't need any port forwarding or anything like that with the ephemeral nodes. It just Jenkins will handle setting all of that up and connecting and doing everything like that. So
No, so
I
that's good.
think the real question is, if that's the plan, is that plan going to be in place for, like, I don't think we'd want to wait till October, right? Like, there'd be
no,
some
no,
time by we'd say, like, all right, if we're going to be able to support that, this would need to be in place by X, and it will include 13 or won't include 13. So that's kind of the question I would have, is like, do you think based on your plan, we can assume we'll have 12 or 13 nodes, or should we assume that for 23 we won't, and make the choices for this, or like, the
I
requirements for 23 based on that?
I believe we should be able to. From a workload perspective, wrapping up this Equinix move, and then this
Yeah.
back stadium change would be the next thing on my like focus list. So
Okay.
um, I can make sure to get that over the finish line before then,
Okay.
and not before then, but in plenty of time for them to run tests and find mistakes and
Okay.
find issues and fix them. So
Okay. Sounds good.
but yeah, that's pretty much everything on the Orca upgrade.
Okay. So basically, you have a plan, and we'll be working on the plan, I guess, fairly soon and stuff.
Mhm. Okay.
Okay. The next one is the new machine replacement for Equinix 64 servers. I think, Ryan, that would probably be you to
Yeah,
start.
we've made good progress finally on we've got the backup instance up and running. I believe we're ready to shut off the other backup and return that to Equinix. That'll give them one huge machine back, and additionally the whole other account that has the 2 workspace machines. I've worked with Richard to get that tested, and we've had it been running for a few days. So I think those are good. I haven't heard any issues or anything with that. So I believe that we can get those shut off. The SmartOS machines, I haven't seen any traction or action on that from the SmartOS community. So I think we need to reach back out to Brianna and be like, hey, we need to shut these other machines off. And so either you need to add some focus in this, but we may need to have a gap in testing coverage for a little while to deter, and then once you get this back up and running, you'll have testing again. So we may need to just let them know or ping that issue, or kind of get somebody with a little to add some focus to it, to make sure that SmartOS testing continues into the future.
Yeah, I wonder if trying to schedule a meeting or something, that sometimes get a few people in the room and just explain it's time, the machines have to go, and unless just so they don't oh, we thought you were working on it, right? We can make it pretty clear, we're waiting on you, we're here to help you, but
Yep.
Okay. Well, that's what my suggestion is, try and get something together with Brianna and maybe a few of us from the, yourself and maybe a couple of build members just to add to the discussion.
Yeah, that sounds like a sage strategy that we should follow. Get a meeting with them. Beyond the SmartOS machines, then there's just 3 more instances. One of them is the unencrypted is what it's listed as in our infra. I don't believe it's in an unencrypted role anymore. I think it's really a hot standby for node dub, if I'm understanding correctly. I've been looking at it, and it seems, if I understand, and I've been kind of just auditing and researching and making sure I get what's going on there. It appears as though it's been set up as a web server, syncing all the data from the node.js. It's in the load balancer as it can switch. It's not in the load balancer as a secondary head. It's not always switching back and forth. It's just it's a
failover. Yeah,
it's a second pool. So if it'll fail over to the second pool, and my understanding is that sometimes there's been some sort of strange flapping where the first pool, it switches to it, which is not really explained. Is that what I'm understanding with that too?
Yeah, we never really figured out why the DigitalOcean droplet, frequently drops things. Effectively, that's what happens. It slows down, drops connections.
I think every time there's a light,
and then it flips back, after a few minutes. So it seems to be temporary, but it does seem to be happening frequently enough that at one point it was only Michael and I still see the emails coming through from Cloudflare, and because it recovers within a few minutes, it's by the time we look at it, it's already recovered. So yeah, it happened.
Yeah,
you can see on the graphs, I think, that you can see a spike, and then it kind of.
And there's Cloudflare logs that show how often it's popped, and it seems like.
And people have suggested we were tweaking all kinds of Nginx settings on the DigitalOcean droplet, and it didn't really seem to make much difference, which is why we ended up with the whole very long running, which we'll talk about again later on, the R2 migration for downloads and stuff, because that's all been served via this Nginx route through the Cloudflare load balancing and everything. So I think we were looking at is it just load? Are we just putting, well, I say we, the ecosystem putting too much load through that single DigitalOcean droplet? Maybe. Even with the Cloudflare load balancing in front of it, because obviously at some point the load balancing has to hit the actual underlying servers. But it's hard to. I don't think any of us in the rest of the project has had the. A few of us have looked at it from time to time, but maybe we don't have the knowledge, or we just haven't been able to catch or figure out what it is that's. We've done all sorts of things. I think at one point, for example, we cut out a whole bunch of bogus Artifactory traffic. Some Artifactory clients had misconfigured their Artifactory setups to treat node.js.org as an npm registry, which it isn't. So we were seeing loads and loads of bogus, like, try and get this module from this path, and never going to work.
Right.
So again, that was done in a way that it should have let normal traffic through, but not all this bogus traffic. But then, people were complaining to Artifactory because they were getting errors, and then Artifactory came to us and complained, and we said, yeah, it's all because we're seeing all these requests that shouldn't be, they're requests for things that shouldn't be on the server, so they're never going to succeed. So we've just cut them off in Cloudflare before they actually hit the underlying servers. So.
Got it. So
Uh,
to rebuild this unencrypted server, then I should be able to just kind of replicate what's in place. It won't solve any of the other above issues, but it should. Is that in Ansible for building a web node like that? And is it, there's a whole standalone section inside of the Ansible thing that says that these are the www standalone that is not tied to anything. Does that?
I honestly don't know. It might not be.
Okay.
I think I'm going to say, like, even if there are Ansible things, it's not one that we've ever run. So, like, that's one of the ones where I think some people may have tried to keep it up to date, but we've never been brave enough to run them.
We've definitely
We're
tried
not
to keep
sure.
we've definitely tried to keep the Ansible thing that sort of mirrors node.js, that we have tried to keep up to date. But again, like Michael says, we've never run it on a live system. But I don't recall seeing anything about unencrypted. Was that true? No, I think there was at least an Nginx config for unencrypted.
Should they be
I
very
don't know.
similar?
You'd have to look at sorry?
Should they be very similar?
I guess, but then there's obviously somewhere there's a configuration for unencrypted to do the rsyncing from node.js.
Right.
And I can't
Yeah.
remember if it is in Ansible or not. I mean, it'll be obviously.
I don't think it is. I looked for it. The bash history has been really helpful on unencrypted.
Okay. Shows how often people do anything on it.
Yeah. There's it's a rsync service that's running. It's in a what you call it? Why is the name escaping me? The systemd service. That is doing the rsync. And so I see where that config is, but I don't see that config file in Ansible anywhere. So that might be.
Yeah, it could very well not be.
The other thing I'll add is, like, this is one of the ones I would say, like, after the Mac one, which you're working on, like, that would be, I think this is like the perfect case for something that would be great to have the Linux IT team running and keeping up, because it's like people complain when it's not available. And there's a few moving parts and stuff like so just, I was trying to say is, like, for your next major thing after this, it would be good to, like, think, like, how should our web server be running versus how it's gone over the many years.
Right. And rather than having one web server to rule them all, and if it gets overloaded, fail over to something else, it might actually be better to have a couple of web heads that, share, etc.
So whatever makes sense in terms of a recommendation. The other things to add is, like, the website itself has already been moved somewhere else. So this is really the downloads. And there's also an effort around Cloudflare workers, which I don't know you've seen, but, like, there's a few things to try and make it better, but it would be good to have, like, hey, we've thought it out. Here's the plan, and here's what Linux IT will operate, and keep going. Back to your first question, the backup instance, Richard, are you happy for the old one to be given back? I think just because Ryan, you said you thought it was.
I had a quick sniff around the new server, and as far as I could tell, things were there. So, yeah, I think I'm in agreement that we can turn the old one off. And
okay, just wanted to make sure you had a definitive answer on that one.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think it looks the same as the old one. Albeit without the old nightlies that we agreed to not carry forward. But yeah, I mean, yeah, I think it's good. I mean, it's the perennial question with backup is, can it actually be used to recover anything? But I think that's a completely separate question outside of the migration.
Right. And that also looked like another candidate for something that we could probably look into. There's Tarsnap and rsync.net and other like providers of backup style services like that might be better than having our own
Yeah.
server and our own
Sure.
disk that might be something that we could talk to
Yeah.
OpenJS Foundation about negotiating an agreement with them and getting that in place and making, switching over to having a more robust backup solution that way as opposed to a
Yes.
Roll your own. Yeah,
yeah,
totally
yeah.
agree.
Yeah. I mean, from my point of view, without having the re-engineering uh, things, it's like, yeah, at the moment, I'm reasonably confident in the backups just because we're replicating the data in so many places. I mean,
Hmm.
obviously, one could look at that and say that's inefficient. With another hat on, you can look at it and say, well, the chances of them all going wrong at the same time is,
Yeah.
is much smaller. So yeah, I think it's a sort of cost slash benefit slash risk assessment. But yeah, so someone wants to do that, that'd be great.
So sorry, back to you. You were talking about the three last ones with
Oh yes,
the first
and
one.
then so there was unencrypted. Then there's the Grafana server. That I don't, if I'm understanding correctly, there's not a lot tied to that right now. It's sort of a
No, the
and
only thing that's talking to that is there's like a Slack integration which is posting to like a Jenkins build alerts channel or something like that
mhm,
in the OpenJS Foundation Slack.
mhm,
But I mean that's just linked to the Grafana alert, so that's monitoring disk space on like the 4 or 5 servers that are currently configured in Grafana. Um, Other than that, there's nothing really that Grafana is doing other than collecting stats. I can't even remember. It's possible that like the Telegraph agent setup isn't in Ansible. So
mhm.
like I don't think there's anything in Ansible set up to even tell machines to talk to Grafana. Um, so yeah, if we can migrate, that'd be great. If not, it's not the end of the world if that goes away and then we look at it again in the future or something.
Right.
Yeah,
Or
I'd almost just say
I
let it
I
go.
would I would also say that I think it was set up with like a trial license, and I believe that trial license has expired. So
yes.
if you log into Grafana now, it tells you, your license has expired. Um, Again, because it's not that we're questioning whether it's useful. It's we're not using it in anything critical at the moment. So it's kind of like people feel that would be useful, then maybe it'd be worth looking at whether we should be licensing Grafana and,
Right.
or whatever it is. But at the moment, it's kind of there. Obviously, it's more work to decommission it than, well, obviously not with a migration. You just don't migrate it and delete the server. But it's kind of it's there. If people find a use for it, then
Mhm.
let's look at it. If not,
But why wouldn't we just let it go at this point? Is there a good reason
I mean,
to?
the space notifications have been useful. I mean, it's a trade-off between are people paying attention to the notifications when they do happen, which has happened, but it kind of depends when it happens. I mean, if it's over the weekend, then there's a good chance that by the time you come in on Monday,
Are
the
those the
space.
ones like I know? I guess
The
Ulysses
critical
ones.
machines that they are the CI release, WW unencrypted. I think metrics and GitHub bot, but I really don't know what metrics is being used for at the moment, and I have a sneaky suspicion that because the Telegraph agent setup's not in Ansible, I probably didn't copy that over to the new GitHub bot server, so that may have actually stopped working. um,
Yeah. I mean, ultimately, the bigger issue here is kind of like with the backup server. Monitoring and alerting
yeah,
is a thing that needs to have some form of coverage, and this
yeah.
is like the first foray into having a nice monitoring system, but it isn't fully baked and isn't being relied upon right now. But there
I
should be
mean,
something.
yeah,
Yeah, I agree.
it, in theory, like the stuff Ulysses put together to report from Jenkins, like the agent status,
Hmm.
in that, I mean, again, that theoretically could have been stuff that could have been driven through Grafana had someone had the time to set up all the agents and all the Jenkins servers and then
Hmm.
configure the appropriate reporting in Grafana. Um, whether one's better over the other is you know on the one hand Grafana is fairly standard, but then on the other hand the stuff Ulysses did put together works, and it's kind of like I suppose the difference is that the stuff Ulysses put together is more or less saying, can Jenkins contact the machine or not? So anything that's outside of that can't really do through that reporting. Grafana has the ability to maybe report on other things if we actually get to the point where we say, yeah, it'd be good if we had dashboards or alerting for this. So again, it's one of those things where there's all sorts of possibilities of things we could be doing if someone had time to spend to figure out what that thing would be and put the plumbing in place to do that.
Yep. Infrastructure monitoring, that could be on the, far in the future past the other things that.
I mean, it's the kind of thing like, when we were investigating things like the WW, people logging into DigitalOcean to look at the graphs there. I mean, that's great. I mean, the graphs are there in DigitalOcean, but again, occasionally you might want to look at some other server and see like loads or disk usage or whatever have you. And those are kind of things that had you set the stuff up beforehand ahead of time with the reporting, that'd be relatively easy to then drop in and have a look and glance and things. Otherwise, you're looking at how do I get that information? Because not all the providers do offer like the monitoring.
Yeah, and it's the trend has been to move towards having a service provider that provides these sorts of things. So instead of a Grafana server, it's a negotiated agreement with Datadog, and then we run the Datadog agent, and then we have our charts and graphs, everything else available there. I don't, it's easier that way. But of course, it always introduces that whole and then what if Datadog changes their mind? And then
at least with the Grafana, I think how I'd categorize it is the existing Grafana server is an experiment. I think it's an experiment that we've not actually then gone back and said, is this working for us, or should we just cut it? It's an experiment that someone else in the build working group who had time at that point set it up. It was running. The license is now expired, but yeah, it's been running, and then no one's actually gone back to either decommission it or expand it. So it's in the state it's in at the moment. And
that's kind of my question.
I don't think any of us are wedded that it has to be Grafana. I mean, the fact that it was all open source and free and meant that at least it was something we could play with without incurring credit costs or whatever have you. If that's something that you and the Linux IT have other solutions for, I think we'd be open to exploring those.
Okay,
so again, with this migration, if you get to the point where we have to hand the machine back, but we don't have the replacement set up, I don't think that's the end of the world. I mean, we will lose a bit of monitoring, but again, it's not fatalistic, I think.
Okay, if it's simple, I will do it, but I will also do it last. And the last server is just the node cross compiling container servers.
Okay.
Trying to remember.
Yeah, I know the one you mean. I've got a feeling we do need to migrate that because I think that's the only release container machine we've got.
Yes, it is. The Ubuntu 18.04 Docker x64.1, the release joint.
Yeah. So again, I don't think the host needs to be Ubuntu 18. Ubuntu 24 can be fine because it's running Docker containers. So as long as it's running the same containers. But the setup for that is in Ansible, so we should be able to migrate that to a new host relatively straightforwardly. But yeah.
And then I haven't built a Docker host and set up.
There's a Docker host. Yeah.
There is a Docker host playbook.
There is a Docker host playbook, and I think if you run Jenkins, no, there is a Docker host playbook. Yeah, in Jenkins, sorry, in Ansible playbooks, there's a I think it's Jenkins Docker host, but it's docker-host.
Yeah. Yes, I found it. It's actually, yep, just underneath Jenkins Docker-host, and then
and if you look in the inventory in the secrets repo, you'll see how the existing Docker host has been defined in the inventory. It's basically there's some standards under the so normally you would have in the secrets repo the host name and then like the Jenkins secret. And then for the Docker hosts, there are basically YAML groups, one for each container, and they point to the type of container and then the secret for that container, because each container runs its own Jenkins agents.
But that's in the secrets repo. Is there, so I think the thing I was like stumbling on is what to do about the host vars when, you know, normally like there's a host and you set up, you put the secret in there.
Yeah.
Um,
So yeah, if you look in the secrets repo
uh-huh.
for the Docker host container, but for the Docker host, there
Okay.
is an entry for the host, and underneath the host, there are entries for each container that's running on the host.
And so
And the playbook will look at that and set up the containers based on what's in the inventory that happens to be in the host. And it's in the secrets repo because that also contains a Jenkins secret to stand up the Jenkins agents inside the container.
Okay, so I should basically just put it in the secrets repo first, and then it should be able to find it, and I don't need to worry about putting it in the host vars to do the initial Ansible provision, right?
Yeah, I mean, you'll need the IP address somewhere. Normally we put the IP address in the public inventory, but I mean,
right.
that could go in the secrets. I get that. That's something that someone has asked before, is to, you know, should we be putting the IP addresses in secrets and not making them public? But again, that's, you know, at the moment they're all public, and we paste them into GitHub issues anyway, so people can find them. So yeah, either way, as long for the playbook to work, you need both the IP address and the secret for Jenkins.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the format of how it is in the secrets repo, will that work in the, like, because what I've been doing so far is locally on my machine in the host vars directory, creating the, you know, test-mnx-ubuntu, whatever, and then putting the secret there to initially provision it, and then
I
committing that secret later to the secrets repo.
I think it will. I can't remember how you translate the YAML to whatever. Oh, I suppose you could have the host vars in YAML format anyway. So yeah, I mean, it should do. I tried it, but yeah, because Ansible just needs the variables, and you can define them in the inventory or in their own separate files. So as long as the variables are there in the, you know, the right format, then Ansible should be able to load them.
And the containers themselves, how do those get provisioned, and or do we just move them over, or?
No. They are in the Ansible playbook.
Oh, they are.
Yeah, they are in Ansible roles Docker.
I'm going to have to drop off, so I'm going to make Richard the owner of the meeting, and you all can continue. You can take any notes on the remaining stuff. That would be great.
Yeah.
Okay. Talk to you later.
And I think we can go a little bit deeper on this, maybe just through Slack or something. We don't have to keep talking, you know, troubleshooting. So I think I've got enough of a handle on it now that I can just ask questions.
Okay.
Yeah. I have to drop as well, guys. Thank you.
All right. Yeah.
Oh, I see all the Docker files here in the templates. Got it.
Yeah, and then when you look at the when you actually look at the secrets file and the inventory, you'll see that I can't remember what the name of the variable is, but for each container, there's a string that matches the file names that you're looking at with the templates. So like the template will have something like Ubuntu 22-shared or something. You know, there's the whole. There are all those templates in the Docker role, Docker file templates, and the name of that is matched. The playbook will match the name of that to what's defined in the inventory to then create it will create the container. It will actually create a systemd service to start that container. So the whole playbook will set up the Docker host. So all you need to do is provision the Docker host with the right things in the inventory, and then in theory, running the Docker host playbook would create all the containers and the configuration for the machine to automatically start the containers, so that, you know, if the machine reboots, it will automatically restart all the containers. And because they're just running Jenkins, there's no real, you know, other than the minimal stuff to run Jenkins, the container doesn't really contain anything other than what's in the Docker file for the tooling, you know, create the compiler and stuff, and then the Jenkins agent. So yeah, there's nothing you need to copy across from the existing machine, because theoretically the machines don't hold any, the release machines and the test machines generally don't hold state, although we do have a C cache, but again the C cache is not vital. The T cache isn't there. It just means your builds take longer to build. So yeah, in theory, to migrate Docker container, it's a case of new machine, Ansible variables similar to the existing machine, and yeah, the playbook should take care of setting everything up.
Perfect. I'll focus on that today to see if I can't get that knocked out. That seems
Okay.
pretty low hanging fruit for
Yeah,
this
I
last one.
think it should be, hopefully no surprises, but obviously if you do find any, scream at me and we can figure that out. But yeah, the Docker host, I mean, I didn't write it. It does seem to work quite well in terms of at least the way it was set up to create all of these containers. There is some stuff in the doc. Is there a docs direct? There's like a docs folder in the build repo for Jenkins machines, and there's a little section on Docker hosts, but they're more for once the machines are set up. If you need to troubleshoot, like you need to restart an individual container, we've got some documentation in there about how to. I mean, it's basically finding the system D service and restarting it. But yeah, it's should be taken care of. Okay, what else have we got on the agenda?
The Mac OS refuses to start Node.
Yeah, I don't really know much about that. I know Ulysses started looking at that and then stopped, so I presume there's no update. Sorry.
Yeah, I'm
Just all of my things have suddenly decided that my login's timed out, so I need to log back in. Yeah. So yeah, let's put no update for that one. And then on the final thing about the R2 migration, so there was a change that was merged, but it did break the release workflow. So I partially undid that, and then a new fix was put in, and there's still some issue on there, so we're still investigating. So I think that's more or less the progress on that at the moment. Is it's in place, it's progressing, but it's still not quite there yet.
Is that so? That's not on and serving releases yet. Is that my understanding, or it is and just needs?
So the way it's been done at the moment is it's on. It's not serving the primary URL. So if you go to like the normal thing, you're still going through the old infrastructure, but there is like an r2.nodejs.org, which is being served from the Cloudflare worker. And the current problem is that the releases are not automatically being copied over to R2. So what we're trying to work on at the moment is, can we not disrupt the existing release workflow, but still copy the binaries into the R2 storage so that they're there in R2, and then once we're confident that the R2 stuff is being populated correctly, we can then make a decision as when do we feel ready to then try switching the primary serving of downloads to R2. So you always hit R2 first, and that's always it's kind of been on a sort of, it's been ticking away in the background. The priority has been to not disrupt people's existing downloads. So we've been trying to go very cautiously. The problem we've got is we don't really have an easy path of how do we test that the release workflow hasn't been broken. We do a release, which is always a bit like, well, that means then that we don't, we can merge things and be reasonably confident, but then not know until we actually try it if something's gone wrong. And the problem is a lot of these things are on cron timers, and we don't necessarily have logs. So if something goes wrong, we're like looking at it thinking, well, what went wrong? And we're not quite sure. And we have to either look and see if there was something obvious in the Jenkins log or something on the R2 side. Or we have to try and log on the machine and, you know, run a command manually and see what happened there. You know, does the command work? You know, is there some error coming back from the S3 agent trying to talk to R2, or, you know, we actually got the sequence. So one of the challenges we've had is that the downloads, we use the single term downloads, but it's actually like you've got the nightlies that are being built. You've seen the nightlies. The nightlies are being built like automatically by Jenkins on chain, each on a daily schedule.
Yep.
And that there are sort of automated cron jobs that take care of once the data is on the staging server. If it's a nightly, it's automatically promoted from the staging server to the download server, and the nightlies don't get signed or anything. So it's a reasonably automatic, you know, there's a path through all of these servers where you end up with the Jenkins agent, you know, the Jenkins job uploads to node.js in a staging area. Then there's a cron job that takes the thing from the staging area, SHA-sums it, and then puts it in the download area. And this R2 stuff is trying to hook in and say, well, also at the time that, you know, we stage it in R2, and then so originally it was being copied directly to R2, and then we said for actual releases, because of the way the releases are done, where the releases don't go out until the releaser has actually signed the binaries. So again, they get put into staging, but they don't automatically get copied across. There's another release workflow which the releaser has to run, which then, you know, SHA-sums everything, downloads the SHA-sums locally, signs it with your GPG key, re-uploads it, and then it's copied across.
Right. That's the actual release versus, and so putting it to R2 is an actual release step.
So in the beginning, we were just blindly copying stuff from from up to R2 directly, and then in the original implementation, it was like, okay, when we move something from staging on node.js to the actual live release area, at that point, upload to R2. And the problem is, you know, if you've got a release that's got like 13 different tarballs or zip files, that can take a long time to actually upload to R2 if you're doing it all at that point in time. So we were finding for releases, they were doing the signing, re-uploading, you know, as part of the script, and then they were just sitting there on a prompt where there was no feedback for like, you know, 20 minutes, half an hour, and you're just looking there, sitting there thinking, what's going on? It's like, and then at the time we actually hit a problem, so some sort of S3 limit or whatever it was, and it was like the release is just going to shrug their, you know, the releases don't have access to the build infra. So, you know, you shrug your hands and say, well, what do I do now? What state is the release in? Because I've done my bit of the release, and now someone in the automation.
I've signed it. It's good to go. I've pushed the button, and
so what we're trying to do now with the changes in R2 is have a separate R2 staging area to mirror what's on node.js. So the idea is, as things are staged on node.js, they're also staged in R2. And in theory, then, when we do that step, which is copy the thing from staging to the production area on node.js, in theory in R2, it's an R2 to R2 copy from an R2 staging area into the R2 distribution bucket. That should be a lot quicker than, you know, uploading from DigitalOcean or whichever, you know, server it is.
Right, it should be just a quick copy.
An R2 should, in theory, be much quicker than an actual upload. But again, yeah, we had something in place, and then, you know, the people that are actually looking at the R2 side of things, they're saying, the last nightly isn't actually in R2, so that means something's gone wrong somewhere. And we need to look at that a bit more. So yeah, that's in progress. That's this R2 stuff. I think the idea is, if possible, and again, there might be something you have, later on have time to look at again and think if this is the optimum setup. I think the idea is if we can get it, that we can stage build in R2 and make like the distribution in R2 the primary download thing, then that should alleviate. Well, it will alleviate the pressure on Node.ww. It may mean that eventually we can cut Node.ww completely and just serve everything through Cloudflare.
Or at least the dist part of it, and that's
But again, it's like, we want to proceed cautiously, slowly. If R2 falls over in a heap because we haven't battle tested it or whatever, we misconfigured it, then at least at the moment we know we've got an existing working setup, even though we are hitting some problems every now and then that causes Cloudflare to fail over to unencrypted. But even that, it causes a temporary blip for whoever happens to be caught at that time when their requests time out. But it seems to be enough to at least keep the things running generally as a whole. And yeah, I think we've been quite careful to try not to make that situation worse as we try and migrate to hopefully something better. And yeah, we've been slowly moving things off node.ww. So like Michael alluded to earlier, the website itself is now served out of the cell. So that's no longer being served out of the Nginx thing running on node.ww. So node.ww is still serving downloads, including the API documentation. So for node releases, the API documentation is produced at the same time as the release binaries. It's all produced as part of the release job. So the API docs are still being served via node.ww and the Cloudflare CDN in front of it. Again, maybe that might change in the future. There's some website project about looking at the API docs that may end up, doing their own spin on the API docs. But again, it's in progress and we haven't really committed to shifting things. So,
got it.
yeah.
That helps. Yeah, I've just been curious, like where that's headed and what state that's in, like whether or not it's I know it's been something that's been cooking for a year now, or at least.
Yeah, I mean, part of it is that we've got some good people that understand perhaps R2 a bit more than like I do, and they put things in like they're running on Cloudflare workers. They've got a script that mimics. So like if you've got like an Nginx web server or any sort of web server, if you point at a directory, you get like a directory listing of the files. Assuming that you've got the access to get the files. Again, there was something that was put together to run on the workers to actually generate that sort of same style directory listing to try and minimize the surprise of people. So in theory, if we do the
I used to be able to just go to this page and navigate down and download the one that I wanted.
That was the idea.
Yep. Yeah.
So that does seem to work. Yeah, I mean, if you go to oops. Spell.
Do we own node.js.com?
I don't believe so, or at least I don't think Bill does. I don't know if.
Do we own that domain?
No, I don't think we do, unless it's something the Linux Foundation owns.
No, I'm just
but I don't think
surprised
we do.
Yeah, I just went to r2.nodejs.com on accident, and I'm like, it's all in Chinese. I'm like, oh, that's
okay. We do have issues with like, copies of squatting and stuff.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know if it's squatting. I mean, I think some of the Chinese node mirrors are like well intentioned, but possibly unmaintained or outdated or whatever it is. Yeah, I mean, I think Node.js will. We own it. I can't remember exactly if that's the foundation owns it or the node project owns it. But it is something under our control, and
the domain is under your control. Usually I see that like the org and the com for a project this size are both under their control, but it's surprising that one is not.
Probably I suspect it was all tied up back when everything was owned by Joyent.
Yeah.
And whenever they got round to registering and then presumably handing over to the foundation when it was, when Node moved to the foundation. So I know. This is where I have some knowledge of like how things operate, but maybe not so much how it, the actual ownership structure and who's paying for things and stuff. I think, for example, I can't remember if the registration is through like the usual Linux Foundation domain registration, or whether it's again something that we're doing slightly differently for some historical reason that may not actually be a technical reason. It may just be it's the way we've always done it. It's not Cloudflare, for example. So despite the fact that we configure subdomains in Cloudflare, I don't think Cloudflare are where we don't register the Node.js domain. So
yeah, I see nodejs.org in our Linux Foundation DN simple. So we're running that, we're auto renewing that on behalf of Node.js. But we do not have nodejs.com. That's all. I was just like, oh, I would have expected that, but it's not there. So.
I mean, I know, for example, that we're running our own Mailgun server for iojs.org email addresses.
Mm-hmm.
But all Node.js.org email addresses have to go through the Linux Foundation aliases and changes. So again, okay. I'm going to need to drop. So reach out to me on Slack if there's any questions.
And the destructive actions I'm going to take, I'm going to take down the backup server. I'm going to take down those 2 worker servers.
Yeah, I think we're ready for that now. So
great.
All right. Thank you.